My daughter-in-law stood in the house I paid for and told me it needed a family in it, not a widow. I smiled and said, "All right." 11 days later, she dropped the keys on my floor. I was 68. The house was in Palm Beach, Florida. It cost $12 million, and I earned it washing hospital sheets for 29 years. Not a figure of speech, surgical drapes, isolation gowns, the linens off beds that people died in. My son had already promised that house to his wife's parents. He told me so in my own front hall, standing on my own floor, while she watched from the stairs. I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not say one unkind word to either of them. I signed one piece of paper, and I told nobody for 5 weeks. 11 days after that afternoon, 3 moving trucks came up my driveway, and what was waiting inside made her keys hit the marble hard enough that I heard them from 15 feet away. I promise you, it is not what you're expecting, and it is not about the money. If anybody has ever discussed your future in front of you, in the third person, the way you discuss furniture for a smaller room, subscribe before we go one step further. I want you here for the part where those keys hit the floor. All right, let me back up. My name is Adele Hargrove. I am 70 now. All of this happened 2 years ago, when I was 68, and I'll tell it in order, because out of order, it just sounds like a wealthy woman complaining. I want to start with where the money came from. Everything else depends on it. I did not inherit $1. My father repaired boilers for a school district in Ocala. My mother worked a switchboard at a county hospital, the old kind, with the cords. We were not poor and we were not comfortable. Nobody in my family had ever owned anything worth insuring. I went to community college at night for 2 years and never finished. At 22, I took a job in the laundry department of the same hospital where my mother answered the phones, $11 a shift. The heat in that room in August is something I still cannot describe. And here is the part nobody believes. I was good at it. Not the folding, the arithmetic. I could read a hospital's linen contract and see where it was bleeding, turnaround times, loss rates, how many pounds they were paying for that they never got back. I spent 13 years learning that business from the inside. At 35, I mortgaged the little house Warren and I had bought, which was the only thing we owned, and I bought out a failing industrial laundry in Lakeland with 11 employees, 2 trucks, and a boiler older than I was. Warren signed that mortgage next to me. I want that on the record, too. 29 years later, Meridian Linen served hospital systems across 6 states and employed 380 people. Nobody has ever heard of us. You don't hear about the company that washes the sheets. You only notice when it doesn't get done. I want to tell you what that cost, and tell you early, because I am not the hero of this story. I missed 26 Christmases in a row. Not the whole day, by a day or 2. I would land at 11 at night on the 25th. I was there for the wrapping paper on the floor. I was not there for the part where anybody opened anything. I sold the company when I was 64. That is where the money came from. All of it. 29 years, and then one Tuesday afternoon, a signature, and a wire transfer that took 40 minutes to clear. And then I bought a villa in Palm Beach. $12 million, 11,000 square feet, 11 bedrooms. Remember that number, because it matters a great deal later. Now I need to be precise about something, because it is the legal spine of everything that follows. That house was mine, solely, entirely. My name on the deed and no other name on it. Ever. Not once. I paid cash from the sale of a company I built. There was no mortgage. There was no partnership. There was no trust, no joint tenancy, no life estate, no arrangement of any kind. I never signed one document giving my son a single square inch of interest in that property. Not one, not ever. Hold on to that, because in a little while you'll watch a 39-year-old man hand that house to his in-laws and wonder how it was possible. It wasn't. That is the entire point. I was 64 when I closed the largest transaction of my life, and I read every page of it myself. 4 years later, my daughter-in-law described me, in my own entryway, in front of my own son, as a widow who needed somewhere quiet to sit. Both of those things are true about the same woman. 4 years apart. Hold that gap in your mind for the next hour, because I suspect a good many of you recognize it. But the house was never for me. I have to tell you about Warren first, or none of the rest of this will make sense. Warren Hargrove taught high school music for 34 years. Same district, same room, 3 generations of somebody's children coming through it. How was the one who did the school run? He was the one who cooked. When our son had a fever at 10 in the morning, the school called Warren because I was in Mobile or Charlotte or a laundry plant in Chattanooga with no windows. I want to be careful how I say this, because I have heard men called saints for less. Warren was not a saint. He was stubborn about small things, and he never once loaded the dishwasher correctly in 46 years. But he was there. He was the one who was there. And in a marriage where one person is always leaving, the one who stays is the one holding it together. And I did not understand that until I was 65, and it was too late to thank him. Now I have to tell you about a piece of paper. In 1979, we were both 24. He conducted the spring concert that May. His first year, 31 kids, half of them out of tune. Afterward, we sat in the car in the parking lot because it was raining too hard to walk. And he took the concert program off the dashboard, turned it over, and started drawing on the back of it with a pencil. He drew a house, ours. He said, "Someday." It was not a large house. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen you could sit in, and he labeled 2 rooms, and I want you to hear both of them. One room he labeled the music room, and on the east side he drew a porch, and underneath it he wrote, in that terrible handwriting of his, "For mornings, both of us, for mornings, both of us." Hy kept that program for 41 years. It lived in the top drawer of his dresser under a tray of collar stays. It went soft as cloth from being handled, and there was a fold across the middle from 4 decades in the dark. And here is what I need you to understand. He never once asked me for it. Not one time in 41 years did Warren Hargrove say, "When are we building my house?" He never said it during the 11 years I was on the road, 200 nights out of the year. He never said it when the company crossed into its 3rd state, or its 5th. He would just take it out sometimes, usually in the winter, usually when things were hard. Look at it for a minute. Put it back. I used to think that was patience. I have since decided it was something sadder than patience. I think my husband worked out, somewhere around year 15, that he was married to a woman who was going to be somewhere else for most of his life, and that drawing was how he kept a version of the future where that had been worth it. So when the money came, I bought him a house, $12 million, 11,000 square feet, 11 bedrooms, for 2 people in their 60s. It did not resemble that drawing in one single respect, not one. 10 times the size and none of the shape. There was no room in it labeled anything at all. And the terrace, that long, beautiful terrace everybody photographed, faced entirely the wrong direction for morning. I have had a great deal of time to think about that, and I do not come out of it looking good. I did not buy him the house in the drawing. I bought the house I thought 29 years had earned me. I bought a receipt. We closed in October, 7 weeks after we moved in. He was diagnosed. He got 13 months. I will tell you the one good part, and then I will leave it alone. There was a stretch in the second spring, about 5 weeks, when he was genuinely well. And every morning of those 5 weeks, I carried 2 chairs from the terrace around to the east side of the house, because the terrace was wrong and the east side was right. And that was where the sun came up over the water. 2 chairs, every morning, around the house. On the 3rd morning, he sat down with his coffee and said, "Adele, when the company's sold and the dust has settled, what are you going to want?" And I sat there with my cup in both hands, and I could not answer him. I said something. I said this. I said, "I want this." And he smiled and let me have it, because he was kind, and he did not ask me again. He never asked me again. Hi died in the upstairs bedroom on a Tuesday in June, and I sat on the edge of that bed afterward and understood, far too late to do anything about it, that I had spent 29 years buying a man a house when what he wanted was a wife who came home for dinner. 29 years ago, I was gone. I got 5 mornings in a chair. Everything I did afterward, I did because of those 5 mornings. 3 years later, my son stood in that same hallway and told me the house was his. And I need you to understand that I built him too. My son's name is Grant. He is 39. He is my only child. And I love him. I want that on the table first, because of everything I am about to say. Grant never had to want for a thing in his life. And that is my doing, not his. By the time he was old enough to notice anything, I was successful, and I was also gone, so I did what absent successful parents do. I paid tuition, a car at 17, a better one at 22. First and last month in an apartment in Tampa, then the next one, then the one after that, a wedding somewhere north of $90,000. Most of which I approved by text from an airport. A business idea of his at 31 that lasted 17 months and cost me $265,000. I have the number memorized. I have all of them memorized. It is the one thing my brain has always been good for. A second idea 2 years later that never got past a logo. A very nice logo. He had it done properly. He is not stupid, and he is not lazy. Exactly. What my son is a man who has never had to find out what he is actually capable of, because every time he came near the edge of finding out, his mother wrote a check. That is not a character flaw I get to be indignant about. I built it. I funded it. I signed it on the memo line. There is one memory I have never been able to put down. I was 11. Warren had a 4-track recorder in the music room at the old house, and the two of them spent a Saturday recording a song. Grant on the piano, badly. Warren on guitar behind him, covering for him the way he covered for everybody. And Grant came down to the kitchen holding that cassette in both hands to play it for me. I was on the phone, a hospital account in Mobile, a contract we were about to lose over a delivery window, and I put my hand out, flat, like this, meaning wait. I finished the call. It was 4 minutes long, maybe 5, and when I turned around, he was gone, and the cassette was on the counter, and I said, "Thanks, honey," to my son's back going up the stairs. That is the entire memory. Nobody shouted, nothing broke. I found that cassette 28 years later in a storage unit, going through Warren's things after he died. I had kept it. Of course he had. Warren kept everything that mattered and nothing that didn't. And it is a hard way to learn something about yourself. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you because when people ask me how my son became a man who would give away his mother's house, that is the honest beginning of the answer. And it has my fingerprints all over it. He married Sloane 8 years ago. She was 35 when all of this happened. I have heard a great many people tell stories about a terrible daughter-in-law, and I have always assumed there were two sides. So let me be fair, Sloane is not stupid either. She is ambitious in a way my son is not. She came from a family that never had much. She watched her parents work hard jobs into their 60s, and she decided early she was not going to end up there. And I understand wanting. I understand it better than almost anybody. I spent 29 years wanting. What I could never get past was the arithmetic. From the first year, I could see her running it, not cruelly, just constantly. Every conversation with me had a purpose in it somewhere, usually arriving around the second cup of coffee. And after Warren died, the arithmetic got faster, because after Warren died, I made a mistake. I was 65 years old. I had just lost my husband of 46 years. I was living alone in 11,000 square feet with rooms I never walked into. And I was drowning. I don't have a better word for it. I wandered around that house at 3 in the morning. I ate standing up over the sink. A plate would sit there for 2 days because there was nobody in the building to notice it. And Grant said, "Mom, why don't we move in? Just for a while. You shouldn't be rattling around in here by yourself." And I said yes. I want you to hear that, because I think there are people watching who have said yes to something similar. We weren't stupid. We were lonely. And being lonely makes you generous in a way that people who are doing arithmetic can use. So they moved in. And for about 6 months, it was genuinely good. I want to say that clearly, because it is the part people leave out. There was noise in that house, a television somewhere at night, somebody else's coffee cup in the sink in the morning, and I would come down and see it there and feel something I had not felt in a year. I liked it. I want it on the record that I liked it. And then it turned, so slowly that I still cannot point to the day. It started with studying. There was a room on the ground floor I used as an office. For the mail, the taxes, and 2 boxes of Warren's things I had not been able to open. Sloane wanted it for a nursery. There was a baby coming. My granddaughter June, 3 now, and a ground floor room made sense. I said fine. Of course I said fine. My desk went into the garage. As far as I know, it's still there. Then it was the pictures. Warren chose every piece of art in every house we lived in. On a music teacher's salary, framed sheet music, secondhand landscapes, 1 small oil painting of a dock from Cedar Key. Over about a year, most of it came down into a storage unit in Riviera Beach, and things Sloane liked better went up instead. I said nothing. It's painted on canvas. She's alive and my husband isn't. Then the photographs came down, and I said nothing about that either, which I think about more than the paintings. And then they came to me about the piano, Warren's upright, out of tune in a way he refused to fix, because he said it was in tune with itself. The one he taught our son on. The one on that cassette. It did not go with the room. And that is where I stopped. I did not mumble it. I stood in that living room and said, "This is my house. That is my husband's piano, and it is going back where it was." Sloane did not argue with me. She cried. And Grant took me by the elbow, gently. He has never once been rough with me, and said quietly, in the hallway, so she would not hear, "Mom, she's pregnant. Can you not do this right now?" 3 weeks later, the piano was still in Riviera Beach, and I was the one who apologized. That's the part nobody warns you about. You don't lose the argument, you win it, and then nothing happens. And then you're the one apologizing. I did not fold because I was weak. I folded because I was outnumbered in a house with a pregnant woman crying in it, and because every day I stayed quiet was easier than the day I didn't. That is how it works. That is how it works on everybody. There was an afternoon I should have understood. I came into the kitchen and Sloane had a designer with her, swatches all over the island, and I said something friendly about it. And the designer turned around, smiling, and said, "Oh, are you Grant's mom? It's so nice you're able to stay with them. Stay with them." And Sloane did not correct her. She let it sit there with the swatches, and then she said, "Adele, we're almost done in here. Do you mind? Do you mind? In my kitchen." And I said, "No, of course not," and took my coffee to the pool like a guest asked to give the family a minute. They redid the landscaping that spring. New sod, new lighting, clusia along the seawall. I came back from the grocery store and the 2 chairs were gone. Nobody asked me. Nobody thought to. Old teak chairs, the finish gone silver. The 2 chairs I carried around that house every morning for 5 weeks. To anyone looking at them, yard furniture at the end of its life. I said nothing about the chairs either. Notice how long that list is getting. Then in November, they came to me together. They always did when it was significant, and explained that with the baby, it would make more sense for me to take the guest house at the back. More privacy, quieter, better for everybody, and the guest house is lovely. Nicer than anywhere I lived until I was 50. That is not the point. The point is that at 66 years old, I moved out of the house I bought for my dying husband and into the back garden, and I told myself it was my idea. Once I was out there, I stopped being consulted about anything. Contractors would arrive, I would walk over and ask what was happening, and be told, pleasantly, that it was handled, and then they let Nilda go. Nilda Rosario cleaned that house for 22 years, going back to the old place before Palm Beach. She was there through Warren's whole illness. She sat with him in the afternoons when I could not make myself stay in that room, and I have never properly thanked her, because there is no way to. They cut her days first. Then they let her go entirely. By text message, no notice, no severance, because Sloane wanted to use a service. I learned later that all of it was perfectly legal in Florida. That is what stayed with me. Not that they broke a rule, that they didn't have to. She came out to the guest house to say goodbye. She would not sit down. And she asked me one question. Not about her job, not about money. She said, "Ma'am, is Mr. Hargrove's piano all right in that place?" And I could not answer her, because I had never once driven up there to check. It is never one big theft. It's 40 small ones. And then one night in March, I heard something in my own kitchen. It was a Thursday in March. I walked up to the main house around 9 for a book from what used to be my study, and came in through the kitchen door the way I always did. The lights were off. They were in the dining room with a bottle of wine and Sloane's parents on speaker. And I stopped in the dark and listened to my son and my daughter-in-law plan the rest of my life. I did not record it. Florida is a 2-party consent state. Record a private conversation here without the consent of everybody in it, and you have committed a felony. My lawyer told me that later in the flattest voice you ever heard. I want it in this story, because people tell me I should have taped it. I had nothing on tape. I had my own ears in my own dark kitchen. Everything I did afterward, I did without a second of proof. I did not need proof. I needed a deed. Here is what I heard. Dale and Bernie Whitcomb, Sloane's parents, people I had eaten Thanksgiving with 4 times, were selling their house in Port Charlotte. That was decided. They were on to timing and bedrooms. They were talking about the front rooms, Warren's rooms, the bedroom where he died, and the sitting room where he spent his last 4 months, because the stairs got to be too much. Bernie's voice came out of that speaker and said, "And what about Adele?" And I heard my daughter-in-law say, "Oh, she's happy back there, and honestly, long-term, there are some really beautiful places down here. She'd have people her own age. And then I heard my son, say, "Yeah, probably a year or two. I stood in that dark kitchen at 68 years old, and I did not make a sound. I want to tell you exactly what I felt, because it surprised me. It was not rage. There was no rage in it anywhere. It was clear, the cleanest feeling I have had in my life. Somebody walked into a room I had been feeling my way around for 3 years and turned on a light, because standing there, I finally accepted the thing I had refused to accept since Warren died. It is the hinge this whole story turns on. My son was not going to become a different person. I had been waiting for that 3 years, and probably 20 before. Waiting for Grant to become the man I kept telling myself was in there. Underneath. And in that kitchen, I understood that the man in the dining room was the finished product. 39 years old and done. That I had made him, and that no amount of additional money was ever going to fix a problem money had caused. I got my book. I walked back down to the guest house in the dark. I did not say one word to either of them, that night or after. And the next morning I called a lawyer. Now I have to tell you about Camille Ostrander, because she is why this story ends the way it does. Camille is in her late 50s. She does estate and elder law, a specialty most people never hear of until the week they desperately need it. She was recommended by the man who handled the sale of my company, which is to say, by somebody with no connection to my son, my daughter-in-law, or anyone they knew. That turned out to matter enormously. It is the first practical thing I'll tell you tonight. Do not use the lawyer your family knows. I sat in her office and told her the whole thing. When I stopped talking, she did not tell me she was sorry, and she did not tell me my son was a monster. She asked a question nobody had asked me in 3 years. She said, "Mrs. Hargrove, what do you actually want?" And I sat there, and I could not answer her. I was 68. I had negotiated contracts with hospital systems in 6 states. I had hired 400 people. And I sat in a leather chair in West Palm Beach and could not produce one sentence about what I wanted. That's the strange, terrible thing about being managed. You stop generating wants of your own. You just react to other people's plans for you. Camille let that silence sit. She did not rescue me from it, which I have since decided was a kindness. And then she said, "All right, different question. If the house were gone tomorrow, just gone, what would you miss?" And I said, "Nothing." And I heard myself say it. And I knew it was true. There was nothing in that building I wanted. My husband wasn't in it. His piano wasn't in it. It was 11,000 square feet of somebody else's idea of a life, and I had not slept under that roof in 2 years. I want to stop for a second, because this is the part that actually matters. If you're watching tonight, how old are you? And what do you still want? Just one thing. Put it below. I read them. And I'll tell you at the end why I asked. And then Camille said, "All right, let's talk about what it could do instead." Camille gave me a list. I visited 3. The third was the Wellington Respite Trust, run by Yolanda Prieto. Their building was a converted ranch house off a 6-lane road, 8 beds, a waiting list 91 names long. The director apologized 3 times for the air conditioning. I stood in that hallway while a woman behind me told someone there was nothing until November. And I thought about 11 bedrooms in Palm Beach with the shades down. That was the decision. 4 seconds. But 4 seconds is not due diligence. And I know what some of you are thinking. Charity, 90% vanished into salaries and letterhead. I pulled their Form 990, public, for every charity in this country. 3 years of them. Program expense ratio, officer compensation, fundraising line. I asked Yolanda what percentage of every dollar reached a resident and watched her face while she answered. Then I called 2 families who had used the respite beds without saying who I was. The first organization on that list did not survive it. The numbers were not ugly, just not good. And at that size, not good is an answer. I spent 29 years reading balance sheets. I did not hand $12 million to a brochure. Now, the part everybody gets wrong. I did not turn my house into a nursing home. You cannot. Yolanda told me so before I offered her anything. A villa in the town of Palm Beach cannot be run as a care facility. Zoning forbids it. Windstorm insurance on that coastline would eat the program alive, and the neighbors would litigate forever. So, the gift agreement read this way. The trust takes the property, sells it, and uses the proceeds to buy and convert 5 acres in Wellington, inland, insurable, zoned for it. 6 long-term residents, 2 respite beds, under Florida law. A home of 6 or fewer is treated as ordinary family use. That is exactly why the number is 6. Yolanda apologized when she explained it. She thought I'd want the house standing there with a plaque. I didn't buy that house for the address. I bought it for a drawing in a drawer. Camille structured it as a gift of the property itself, not a sale and then a donation. Sell first, and I owe capital gains on the appreciation. Less money for beds. Give the asset directly, and that tax never happens. Qualified appraisal, Form 8283. Extremely boring. And boring is the entire reason it worked. Camille also said I'd get a charitable deduction. I asked how much. She said, it's capped as a percentage of your income. You're retired with almost no income, and the unused portion expires after 5 years. Realistically, very little. And I said, good. Then nobody gets to say I did it for the money. I put one condition on the gift. 1. It had to carry my husband's name, the Warren Hargrove house. One other thing, which was not a condition, because I didn't have the nerve. I met the architect in May and brought the concert program. 1979, soft as cloth, folded down the middle. I put it on the table and said, I knew it was ridiculous, but there was a porch on the east side, and if there was ever any way... He picked it up with both hands. Both hands. The way you'd handle an original drawing of a building that mattered. The paperwork closed the last week of June. I did not tell one soul in my family. In the first week of July, a certified letter went to my son. Ownership had transferred to the trust. His occupancy ended on a specific date, 60 days out, printed in bold. Camille was very clear about why. We are not ambushing anybody. Everything we do on the record, because I will not have one person able to say afterward that you were sneaky. He signed for it. We have his signature, and here is what my son did. Hun hired a lawyer. That week, a real one. In Boca, $2,500 retainer. Who told him what any lawyer would? No interest in the property, the transfer valid, nothing to sue over. So Grant had the whole truth by the second week of July, and he said nothing, not to his wife, not to her parents, who were at that moment under contract on their house in Port Charlotte. I have thought about it for 2 years. He could not tell Sloane. Telling her meant admitting he had never owned 1 square inch of it, and that everything she had built on top of it was air. So he waited, and while he waited, her parents sold their home. The second week of August, I was up at the main house, and Grant came into the front hall. He said the Whitcombs closed in 3 weeks, that they were moving in, that this was theirs now, and honestly, Mom, don't come by anymore unless you're invited. And Sloane was on the stairs. She'd come out to watch, and she laughed, a light one, the kind you use when the outcome was never in doubt. She said, Adele, come on, this house needs a family in it, not a widow. And I smiled, and I said, all right, and I picked up my bag and walked out my own front door. 11 days, that's all it was. There is one thing my son did in July that I did not know until Camille found it. Grant signed a quitclaim deed. To settle his in-laws down, they were asking questions by then. He signed a document transferring his interest in the property to Dale and Bernadette Whitcomb and recorded it with the county. That is why they sold their house. They were not fools. They did not take their daughter's word for it. They had a piece of paper with a county recording stamp on it. And a recording stamp looks like truth to anybody who is not a lawyer. A quitclaim deed transfers exactly the interest the signer holds at the moment he signs. No more. Grant held none. Now the second thing. The date in the certified letter came and went. Nobody moved out. Nobody called. So the trust filed for possession in county court. Grant was served at the door. He signed for that too. The second time in 6 weeks, he put his name on a paper about this house. He had 5 business days to answer. He filed nothing, default judgment, and with it a writ of possession, which is not a threat and not a letter. It is a court order, and a deputy carries it out. The deputy posted the 24-hour notice on the front door Tuesday. Grant took it down. I was there the next morning because the trust had asked me weeks before. The sale had closed. The buyer's people were walking the property. And there was a small ceremony for the naming. Did I know the writ was being executed that morning? Yes. Did I know it was the same morning their trucks were coming? No, I did not. And that is the honest truth. But I'd be lying if I told you I was sorry when those trucks came up the drive. I'm not that good a woman. Here is who was in that house. A deputy from the sheriff's office, executing the writ. Camille Ostrander in a gray suit with a folder, because she does not miss things. Yolanda Prieto, 2 people from the buyer's side. The architect, with a rendering board propped in the entry hall. The Warren Hargrove House, Wellington, Florida, respite and transitional residence. And a wooden crate, open, on the floor by the stairs. The bronze plate inside it, wrapped in paper, waiting to be driven out to Wellington. Somebody had folded the paperback for the photographs. It read, The Warren Hargrove House. He drew this porch in 1979 and waited 41 years. He got 5 mornings. This one is for everyone who comes after. The front doors stood wide open because 2 men were carrying equipment through them. So the Whitcombs did not knock. They walked in, Dale first, then Bernie, then Sloane, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. They came in mid-conversation, the way you do when you're arriving somewhere you own, and they stopped. First they saw people, a dozen strangers, hard hats, drawings, a man in a sheriff's uniform by the dining room door. And Bernie said, "Oh, sorry, are we?" Then Sloane saw me, sitting in a chair by the window, the woman who was never to come by again unless invited, sitting there as though she'd been waiting 11 days, which, in a sense, I had. And then she saw the crate. I watched her eyes go across those 2 lines, then go back to the beginning and read them again, the way you do when the words don't assemble the first time. Bronze doesn't happen overnight. Bronze is a lead time, and if it had a lead time, then somebody had known for months. The keys hit the marble. Nobody moved to pick them up. Dale Whitcomb said, "Sloane, what is this?" And that is when my son came through the door behind them. He did not have to read anything. He had held that letter for 5 weeks. I watched him walk into a room and see all at once that the thing he had decided to ignore had happened anyway, on schedule, exactly as the letter said it would. Camille stepped forward and introduced herself. Counsel for Mrs. Hargrove. The property transferred in June. Written notice provided and signed for, a possession action filed and unopposed. And she had copies, if anyone cared to see them. Then she said, very pleasantly, "May I ask what document you're relying on, sir?" And Dale reached into his jacket and took out the quitclaim deed. Camille read it. I folded it, handed it back, and said, so the whole hall could hear, that the instrument was validly executed and correctly recorded, and had conveyed exactly nothing, because a quitclaim conveys only what the signer owns, and the signer had never owned any part of that house. Bernie sat down on the second stair. And Sloane turned to her husband and said, "Signed for? What is she talking about? Signed for?" Grant didn't answer her, and that silence answered her. I got up then, picked her keys up off the floor, and handed them back to her, because she was shaking and it seemed like the decent thing to do. And I said the only thing I said all morning. "There's a good place in Wellington opening next year. Sloane, your mother's welcome to apply. We're keeping a list." Then I put my hat on and walked out past the trucks. The Whitcombs had already closed. 2 people in their 70s sold their home because their daughter told them a villa was waiting. 4 months in a rental. I never once felt good about it. Bernie called 6 weeks later, on a Sunday. She was not angry. She said, "Adele, I don't blame you. I'd have done the same thing. I just wish somebody had told us." The truest sentence. Anybody said about any of this, "We are friendly now," she sends a Christmas card. Grant and Sloane separated within 5 months. What ended it was not the house. It was that she found out, in front of her parents, that he had known. That was not my doing. It also was not my doing. And I've stopped pretending those are different things. We did not speak for 7 months. Then he called, a coffee place in West Palm. He said I had humiliated him. I said, "Yes, that's fair. I'm sorry it happened in front of your in-laws, and I would do it again." And he said, "You could have just told me." I put an envelope on the table. His own lawyer's invoice, sent to the old address he never changed. "I sent you a certified letter, Grant, and then you paid a man $2,500 to tell you it was real." Then I put the cassette on the table. He looked at it and did not know what it was. I told him. He said, "Okay." And he set his coffee cup down on the lid of it. Then he said, bitterly, "What do you even want, Mom?" For the first time in 3 years, I had an answer. I want to be somewhere at 7 in the morning where somebody's expecting me. He works now, a real job. I is not good at it yet, and he hates it. I have not offered him $1. That is the most mothering I have ever done. And I started at 68. June is 3. In Florida, grandparents have almost no right to see a grandchild. I see her because Sloan allows it, and I have thanked her. An accountant handed me the storage unit file and asked if the trust should keep paying. The last 14 months had not been paid by me. Nilda Rosario had $47 a month out of her own pocket after they let her go by text, so Warren's piano would not be auctioned. $658. A woman they fired by text message spent $658 of her own money, so my husband's piano would still exist. Sit with that number. I have, for a year now. The first thing I did with Camille, week 1, before the foundation, was an annuity for Nilda for life and a trust for her premiums. She is residence manager of the Warren Hargrove house. Now, the trust hired her themselves. I gave them her name and got out of the way. She still calls me ma'am. The house opened this spring. The porch faces east, built from the pencil drawing. Enlarged, 12 chairs. The piano is in the music room. The drawing is framed in the hall. And I built myself a 2-bedroom in Wellington, 5 minutes away from that same drawing at the size he drew it. There is a man there named Hollis Peak, 91, 30 years of overnight radio, 1 until 5. His body never reset. He wakes at 4, when nobody else is. I left my number with the night staff. If Hollis is up and wants company, call me. They have called 14 times. I have gone 14 times. If you're watching this at 4 in the morning, and I know some of you are, because you tell me what time it is where you are, Hollis is who I'm thinking about. Every Thursday, he asks me the same thing. Adele, what's the news? And I tell him the news. That's the whole friendship. Sloan told me that house needed a family in it, not a widow. She was right about the building. She was wrong about who it was for. There are 8 people in that building tonight, and everyone has a chair. About 40 families a month come through those doors. Daughters who finally sleep. Sons who visit Sundays. She said it needed a family. It has 40. It was never that my son wanted my house. It's that I didn't want anything. I had 11,000 square feet and could not have named one thing I wanted from the rest of my life. A woman who doesn't want anything is furniture. She gets moved around the room by whoever's decorating. The day I decided what that house was for, I stopped being furniture. I told you I'd say why I asked what you still want. That's why the day I could answer it was the day this stopped happening to me and became something I did. So tell me 2 things below. The one thing you still want and how old you are, because I want to see that number next to it. And this one matters more. If somebody who wasn't family showed up for you anyway, year after year, and never got properly thanked, say their name below, just their name. Those are the people this is actually about. If this one meant something to you tonight, hit subscribe and stay with me. There's another one coming.